Have you decided that you would expel Dixon from AFCA?
Mr. Untersteiner.
Justin Untersteiner, Chief Operating Officer at Australian Financial Complaints Authority. That is correct, Senator. So the ASIC had issued a requirement that Dixon maintain an AFCA membership until the 8th of April.
Sorry, who said that?
ASIC.
And they can tell you what to do?
They can, yes.
So ASIC, the corporate cop who has failed to properly enforce the law re Dixon, tells you that you must have the insolvent in administration Dixon as a member.
No, they told Dixon that their membership must remain until the 8th of April.
Right, why?
So Dixon maintained the membership. That's a question you would need to put to ASIC.
You have no insight into why that's the case?
It would be to ensure that consumers who were impacted by Dixon had sufficient time to bring complaints through to AFCA, I anticipate. But really that is a matter you should put to ASIC. But Dixon were required to maintain their membership until the 8th of April.
Okay.
And then the AFCA board met on the
23rd of May.
23rd of May, which was the first board meeting after that date, and they determined that we should take steps to expel Dixon from the AFCA scheme. So Dixon, the administrator for Dixon, was given a 21-day notice to show cause as to why they should not be expelled, and that's where we're at, Senator.
How long was Dixon a member of AFCA for whilst in administration?
Yep, Senator, I can answer that. So Dixon went into administration, I've got the date here, voluntary administration January 2022.
What date was it, sorry?
January 2022.
Jan 22. And when were they a member of AFCA until?
Well, they still remain a member. At this stage, the intention would be subject to... So let me clarify that we've given them an intention to expel as of the end of this month. But that decision will be taken at the board meeting on 20th of this month, pending submissions from the administrator.
So the process we have to go through, Senator, if the board, and it is a decision of the AFCA board, if the AFCA board decide that one of the triggers for expulsion applies, and one of those triggers is that the financial firm is in administration and no longer has a licence to operate, then the process we have to go through under our rules is to provide 21 days notice. So there's due process to show cause as to why they shouldn't be expelled, and then the board will have to make a decision based upon having considered those representations whether to expel. So the first opportunity the board had to consider this matter was the board meeting that has been mentioned in May. Prior to that, obviously, Dixon had been required to be a member of the AFCA scheme till the 8th of April.
Okay. So from January 2022 until July 2024, Dixon, 2.5 years, Dixon Advisory in administration is a member of AFCA?
Correct.
For 2.5 years. Okay. Are there any other organisations in administration that have been a member of AFCA for 2.5 years?
So it varies. So if I can just sort of give you a little bit more detail about the process of expulsion, I think it would be useful.
But sorry, it's a pretty simple question. Are there other organisations that have been a member of the organisation in administration for 2 years?
I can take that on notice.
You don't know?
I suspect there have been, yes.
There have been?
Yeah, I suspect, but I'll have to go back and confirm our records. And the reason for that is the typical trigger for expulsion, there are really 3 different triggers, and I'll just mention them. One is once a firm has been enters into liquidation. And the reason for that, not administration, is because it is possible that a company that goes into administration comes out of administration. So we think it would be inappropriate to be expelling a member while they're in administration if they could come out. The second, and then the third one, which I think is relevant here, is where they are no longer are licensed to operate. And again, that was relevant here.
But, I mean, this is not a new issue. So you and ASIC have worked out an arrangement where Dixon will be a member of your authority until the end of this financial year.
Can I just confirm, we
Is that
haven't
right?
had an arrangement with ASIC at all. ASIC
You told me that ASIC, your evidence was that ASIC asked Dixon to
correct.
remain.
So that's between ASIC and...
So that is an arrangement.
Not between AFCA and ASIC, no, between ASIC and Dixon.
Sorry, just for the record, I thought your evidence was that ASIC had asked that Dixon remain a member of AFCA.
ASIC had told Dixon they had to remain a member of AFCA until the 8th of April. So, so under those circumstances, and we were not aware of any trigger at that point, under those circumstances, it remains a member. And so that is the position. Obviously, as soon as that date passed, and at the very first board meeting, the AFCA board considered whether there was a trigger now to expel Dixon, and that because ASIC no longer had a license, because Dixon no longer had a license to operate, because they were no longer mandated by ASIC to be a member, that's why we took that decision.
But the reality is that they will be a member until the end of this financial year. That's going to happen.
That's correct.
Until the 30th of June.
That's right. That's right. So, how many claims do you have now in relation to Dixon? Because in February you told me that you had almost 2,000.
Yep, so I can give you that information, Senator. So in terms of open Dixon complaints at the moment, we have 2,510.
2,000?
2,510.
So you've had an extra 600 since February this year when we last spoke.
Yeah, I can tell you. If you just bear with me. So I don't have the...
well, I can tell you. On the 15th of February 2024, you advised that AFCA had received 1,948 complaints.
So that's correct then, Senator.
And now you've got 2,500.
Correct.
Right. So what process is driving the solicitation or the receival of these additional complaints?
So I believe that there were several, or there was really one key trigger that saw a spike of complaints come into us this year, and that was complaints lodged to us before the 8th of April. And the 8th of April was the date that ASIC had required Dixon to remain a member of AFCA. So that's where we saw another, I guess, a number of complaints come in that really in the 2 weeks leading up to that April 8 date.
So ASIC has been encouraging people to make complaints to AFCA?
As I understand, and you'd have to talk to ASIC, but what I read was that they notified previous Dixon clients of their right to lodge a complaint with AFCA if they believed that there had been some kind of fault in the advice.
But you're asking me to ask them. I'm asking you because you're part of this scheme. What's your knowledge of what ASIC has been doing?
My knowledge of what ASIC did was provide a notice or a letter of some sort to clients of Dixon at the time or soon after the time they entered into administration, letting them know of their right to lodge a complaint with AFCA.
Okay. How much is the total claim of? If you're saying you've had 2,500 complaints, how much money are we talking about here?
Yeah. So if I look at open complaints, now I just need to. It's important to give some context here. The claim amounts that I'm providing here are purely the claims that have been lodged by consumers. They are yet to be vetted by AFCA. So, you know, some of these will be lower, some may not be in at all. And there's a cap.
I understand you're doing your best, I understand.
Yeah, and there's a cap of the scheme which hasn't been taken into account. So this is pre the $150,000 cap at the CSLR. But at the moment, these are just requests that have come to us that have unprocessed. So they're really, I'd be careful about how you use these figures is really my caution. At open, we have complaints that came in that related to the top 10. So this is claims that were lodged at the time of the introduction of the legislation. There was $312 million worth of claims, and then further claims beyond that date. There was $146 million worth of claims. So that's in the open category. In the closed category, we have awarded $5.7 million in losses.
Okay, so there's hundreds of millions of dollars of losses alleged.
Correct.
Here?
Alleged.
Alleged losses.
Yep.
Okay. So,
may I just clarify, all of those claims are about advised failures?
Yeah,
They're
so
not about misses or...
No, correct. So there may be, just to clarify, and we actually, before we started working on these complaints, we did consult with the sector and we did put out an approach document to really clarify how we apportion loss, just to be very clear about where it would be the managed investment scheme, for instance, versus where it would be the advisor. Our approach is consistent with a previous federal court decision against Dixon as well. At the moment, the complaints we're seeing are typically against, they relate to the advice, conflicts of interest, for instance, and appropriateness of advice or inappropriate advice. But in saying that, we've really only just assessed a small number out of many, and it may very well be that some of those complaints do relate to the managed investment scheme, in which case we would close that complaint.
Right.
So there are only about 47 matters, Senator, that we've determined so far. So it's a drop in the ocean. So there may well be matters that are out of scope for that reason. We just don't know.
So we're talking about 2,500 people?
Correct.
How many of these people do you think, you might not know the answer to this, but are many of these people former Treasury officials?
We wouldn't have visibility of that.
You don't know?
No, we don't.
No idea, Senator.
You just don't know? Okay. Because there's obviously been a lot of, we had Treasury here last night, there's been a lot of discussion and engagement about these matters between yourselves, ASIC, the Treasury. I think there were 3 Treasury officials that have had to declare conflicts of interest in relation to the Dixon matter. Dixon was predominantly a Canberra business. I think that there is a sense that there were a lot of former Commonwealth public servants that may have lost a lot of money here, and this Dixon Advisory organisation has been treated in a very different way to many of these collapses. So do you have any insight into this at all?
No, we don't, Senator.
You don't have any insight.
We have no conflicts of interest with regard to this matter, Senator, but we have no knowledge of any of that.
I'm not asking whether you've been in conflicts of interest.
No, but
I'm asking whether you've become aware.
No, we have not.
Nothing has concerned you so far?
We've had no knowledge or awareness or concern.
Okay, so what determinations have you made about the Dixon model?
Yep, so we have now, let me just open up my data. So we've now made a number of determinations, 23 determinations relating to Dixon, and we have published. We're publishing those, so you can see those if you want to look at those decisions.
Were you concerned about related party transactions?
Yeah, so actually I might even pass on to Dr June Smith just to talk about some of the themes that we've been seeing, which are fairly consistent across those complaints.
So the primary allegations, Senator, relate to best interest duty and the duties of the advisors in the provision of advice to the clients of Dixon, which include individuals and sometimes trustees of self-managed superannuation funds. They all relate to, at the moment, the ones that we have determined, to advise to invest in either of the 2 managed investment schemes, to whether or not that advice was appropriate, to the fees that were associated with that, to whether or not there was adequate disclosure of conflict of interest in relation to the ownership of that company, the related companies, and whether or not that would have had a bearing on the informed way in which clients then made a decision about whether to invest in those companies and schemes or not. So they are the matters that we have turned our mind to, as we would, given these matters are paused pending our determination for an application at the CSLR, and so we are only looking at whether or not there has been an issue related to the advice relationship and whether or not the advisor in all of those circumstances, together with the financial firm, have met all of their obligations.
Okay, so I understand that you're not a law enforcement agency.
That's correct.
I understand that. But given that you have looked into this in detail and you've made these findings as a consumer advocate, are you disappointed that more effort hasn't been taken to enforce the law in relation to these significant breaches?
Well, we're not a consumer advocate either, Senator. Our role is to independently seek to resolve disputes where we can, and where they can't be resolved, to make determinations based upon our jurisdiction. And so that's really the function that we play.
So you're not worried that the book hasn't been thrown at these people?
Senator, we want to see tough action taken against anybody who has caused financial harm and entered into misconduct or misled people. In all of those circumstances, of course, we want to see action taken. And so we have a high number of people who are presenting to us with losses. Of course, we'd like to see strong enforcement action taken.
Is this one of the biggest cases you've had to deal with in terms of volume?
This is, yes.
It is one of the biggest?
Yes.
Okay. And so are you aware that this organisation in some form is still continuing?
Yeah. We're aware of the company arrangements with...
Yeah. And are you aware that the minuscule fine that ASIC agreed with Dixon has not been paid?
Just what I've read in the media.
So were you aware of that at least?
I'm aware that in the media, I'm aware of the level of the fine, obviously, because we've seen that, and I'm aware that there's media reporting that says that's not been paid.
Yeah, and that doesn't bother you?
Of course it does, Senator.
It does bother you?
Our focus, however, is to impartially assess the allegations of these parties against the financial firm in question, and remaining impartial and simply focusing on the allegations before us, looking at the law in relation to the advisor's obligations, any relevant codes of practice, which would include the FAAA Code of Practice in these circumstances as well, Senator. That is our focus, and that impartiality is of utmost importance to us.
I'm pleased to hear that you're concerned about that, because I think a typical person would be concerned if you weren't concerned, that you've made all these findings, you've spent all these resources and all this time trying to resolve these issues as best you can, and the people and the organisation that has done this is still effectively in business still.
Senator, our position as an organisation is, in an ideal world, you wouldn't need us because there aren't complaints coming to us.
Sure.
Right? And that would mean less harm.
Well, in an ideal world, the law would be enforced by an effective corporate regulator.
Yeah, and that's really for this.
So I have one more question. Right. So there are many different agencies that will be asked to give their evidence on the Dixon matter. It is a very serious matter, as you know. You are involved with it as a complaints handling body. The corporate regulator has had an ongoing, and I would say very odd, engagement. And then the Commonwealth Treasury is involved with it to the extent that there has been legislation in relation to the compensation scheme of last resort. So your involvement here on the Dixon matter, though, is confined to receiving the complaints and then making determinations. Is that right?
Yes.
Is there anything else that you do here?
No, there isn't. That would be our role.
Okay. Do you have discussions with ASIC or the operator of the scheme?
So we have reporting obligations to both the regulator ASIC and now also to the scheme. And those reporting obligations means that we provide information about claim numbers and other data sources. And so that is where we have an interaction. We also have, with the CSLR, we will meet again on an operational level just to make sure that, again, we can share that kind of information. Yeah.
The way the CSLR is constructed as well, Senator, is there's an independent chair who...
who's that?
Who was appointed as Ms Joanne Block, who was appointed by government. There then is a actuarial member who has to be a senior actuary who's been got over 10 years' experience, and the third member of the CSLA board has to be a serving AFCA member, AFCA board member.
Who's that?
And that is Ms Delia Rickard. She serves on that.
And that is, sorry, just to confirm, that's a requirement under the legislation.
So we manage that conflict with regard to that.
So to confirm, Senator, the chair is Joanne Block, the actuarial member is Kevin O'Sullivan, and the AFCA board member is Ms Delia Rickard.
Okay. So you meet with the compensation scheme on a regular or irregular basis?
Well, it's a new organisation that's just recently been established, but we would meet on a fairly regular basis.
And how many meetings have you had with them about Dixon?
So we haven't, I don't believe we've had any meetings with the CSLR on Dixon. I think really where the meetings have come about under the legislation, AFCA was asked to set up the company, and so AFCA set up the company and handed over to its independent board. So really the meetings that have been held between AFCA and CSLR have very much been about operational matters, about flow of information, about reporting, but not to talk specifically about cases, because again, I think the AFCA role within the legislation is very defined. You know,
so,
we issue determinations and then it's up to a consumer to lodge a claim with the CSLR.
So who is your minister?
We don't have...
We don't have a minister, Senator, because we're not a government body. Although we were established by this Parliament under the former coalition government, the way in which we were established is similar to the telecommunications industry ombudsman and the state energy ombudsman. So we're a not-for-profit company limited by guarantee. Our inaugural chair was appointed by the government, the Honourable Helen Coonan. Subsequent chair and board members are appointed by the board.
But you spend money in your organisation?
No, but we don't spend government money, Senator.
So all the money you spend, you raise from industry levies?
It is, that's correct, Senator.
And this is the same with the compensation scheme?
In a different way.
Industry levies?
Yeah, so we've got our fee structure, just to give you an idea of what our fee structure looks like, is...
member-based organisations? It's
member-based organisations and it's based on their usage of the system. So we charge based on the number of complaints that come to us and how far they go down the process. And so our model is very much a consumption-based charging model.
Do you meet with government ministers?
We will meet...
We will meet from time to time with government ministers, certainly, and we would meet with the assistant treasurer.
Okay, is he the main minister you would engage with?
Certainly, but we make ourselves available to all parliamentarians.
Has there been a meeting with the assistant treasurer about the Dixon matter?
I'd have to take that on notice. I can't
remember.
I believe that the only discussion that I don't believe we've ever had a meeting with the minister about Dixon per se. We've had some general meetings where we may have given a very brief update on the implementation of the scheme. I think that's...
Has the minister's office asked you for an update on Dixon matters?
We'd have to take that on notice.
Okay, so you would be aware there's a lot of angst in the financial advice sector about the nature of these levies that are going to be levied onto organisations that have nothing to do with this Dixon matter. A lot of these are very small businesses, mum and dad operations. They're going to have to pay for these historical claims where there has been lax law enforcement and, by your own judgment and your own determinations, significant problems here. So have you had engagement with the industry? Have financial advisors raised issues with you? So we've, just again, AFCA has had no role at all in policy making here, so we're really just a player. So we don't, I understand what you're saying, but really doesn't, it's not an AFCA decision that's been made. In saying that, we engage broadly across the sector and we engage broadly with consumer groups. We've had engagement from some groups who have raised the kind of concerns that we've read about in the media in the last few days. Okay, so
and we speak at events. We've been speaking at the FAAA events recently, and others. So
Sorry to cut you off, but we're just keen to move to the next.
I'm almost finished. So look, so what I'm trying to get to is this is a very opaque operation at large, not particularly your organisation, but all the different moving parts to do with the executive government, ASIC, the compensation scheme, your operation, and effectively, as a consequence of all these organisations working in some form, there is a decision taken to extend the term of Dixon in your organisation, which allows now for these claims to be paid by people who had nothing to do with the Dixon matter, which will be very significant on their operations. Many of these are small businesses, and so the purpose of my questioning was to try and work out exactly what's happened here. So just so I understand it, for the record, what you're saying is that ASIC has told Dixon in administration that it should remain a member of AFCA. Is that right?
Correct.
Senator, the scheme and the design of the scheme and who pays what.
And the rest is up to government.
It was passed by Parliament. I mean, this is a matter for Parliament with bipartisan support.
Sorry, this is not right.
I mean, AFCA's role was to establish the CSLR.
No, I understand that.
And we did that.
I'm just trying to be efficient here. So these are not trick questions. All I was trying to establish is how did that part happen? You've given the answer that was an ASIC and Dixon matter. And then the rest is up to the Minister. The Minister makes the determinations going forward about the nature of the levies to be raised. That's all I wanted to know.
And just to comment to you about transparency, we have been publishing information about these complaints on a regular basis now for several years. And we've attended these committees now for a period of time providing information. So our role is to be as transparent as possible, and I believe we have been.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.